When speaking of the confusion created in Paris by the approach of the Allies, the dejection, to use no stronger a term, that was evinced by the upper classes, the good spirit and enthusiasm manifested by the great body of the people who were ready to fight if they could have procured arms, I observed that the departure of the Empress had produced a fatal effect on the public mind. I mention as a singular circumstance that the young King of Rome, contrary to custom, obstinately refused to quit the palace. He wept bitterly, and it was found necessary to carry him away by force. I also added that it was universally reported that the Empress wished to remain, and that the council was inclined to second her wishes until precise orders were received from the Emperor directing her to quit Paris in case of urgent danger on the part of the enemy. Yes, said the Emperor, and those orders were very necessary. The Empress was young and totally inexperienced. Had she been capable of personal decision, my directions would have been quite the contrary. Paris would then have been her proper post, but I foresaw the intrigues of which she would be the object, and I wished to prevent at Paris what subsequently occurred at Orleans. There, the men who were planning the regency, in the expectation of ruling under the Empress, prevented her from joining me. What fatal consequences were thus produced? Would to heaven that I had also dispatched timely orders directing her to quit Orleans. It is certain that at Fontainebleau, Napoleon was, almost at one and the same moment, the victim of every kind of mental distress with which a man can possibly be assailed, subdued by defection, not by force of arms. He felt all that could rouse the indignation of a lofty mind or break an affectionate heart. His friends forsook him, his servants betrayed him, one surrendered up his army, another his treasury. The men whom he had reared, maintained, and loaded with favors were those who wrought his overthrow, the members of the Senate who only the day before had supplied him profusely with conscripts to oppose the enemy, scrupled not to become the instruments of that very enemy. Under the impulse of foreign bayonets, they imputed to him as a crime that which was their own work, and basely broke the idol which they had themselves created, and so servilely worshipped. What a depth of disgrace and degradation! Finally, in this stroke, Napoleon felt more severely than all the rest. His wife and child were carried away from him, and in defiance of treaties and laws, in opposition to all moral principle, he was never allowed to see them anymore. It appears that Napoleon, oppressed by this weight of affliction, surrounded by this odious turpitude and his utter contempt of human nature and all things connected with this world, formed the resolution of ridding himself of life. A letter has been preserved, written in his own hand to the Empress, in which he says that the moment has arrived when she must prepare her mind for everything, that all is possible, even the death of the Emperor. This was doubtless an allusion to the mysterious event of the night of the 12th of April, which was wrapped in profound secrecy. The manuscript of 1814, however, contains some particulars relative to this occurrence, which, if they be correct, will not leave the furious enemies of Napoleon even the satisfaction of repeating the stupid and vulgar remark that he had not the courage to die, for according to the manuscript it appears on the contrary that he could not die. This is not the least extraordinary event in Napoleon's career. His remark, "Heaven has ordained it that I shall live," and the calm and noble resignation which from that moment succeeded, appeared truly sublime. Napoleon's celebrated farewell address to his troops and his last embrace of those eagles which he had immortalized are well known. A Prussian diplomatist who was present had assured me that the scene produced an impression on him that time can never obliterate. He added that the English commissioner who stood near him and who had previously been an inveterate enemy of Napoleon was so deeply moved that he shed tears. Such were the sentiments of respect and veneration naturally inspired by Napoleon, that in spite of the danger and inconvenience occasioned by his presence in France, no one presumed to hasten his departure, and he was allowed full time to make all the arrangements he wished. The Treaty of Abdication is dated the 11th of April, and Napoleon did not quit Fontainebleau until the 20th, 9 days later. Throughout the first part of his journey, he was the object of universal respect and often the warmest and most affectionate interest. Hitherto, foreigners seem to have formed no idea of the spirit that prevailed in France or of the real feelings of the people with regard to the emperor. However, It was deemed prudent to arrange matters so that Napoleon should reach Lyon in the night, or I rather believe it was intended to prevent his reaching that city at all. I received the following particulars from an English gentleman, one of those who had been long detained in France and who happened at the period in question to be residing at Lyon. My informant and the Austrian general went out in disguise and mingled with the crowd that had assembled to see the dethroned monarch pass by. They expected to be much amused with the implications of which they concluded he would be the object, but as soon as the emperor appeared, deep silence prevailed among the multitude, and an old woman, to all appearance above the common class, habited in deep mourning, and with a countenance full of enthusiasm, rushed forward to the door of the emperor's carriage. "Sire," said she, with an air of solemnity, "may the blessing of heaven attend you. Endeavor to make yourself happy. They tear you from us, but our hearts are with you wheresoever you go." The Austrian general, quite disconcerted, said to his companion, "Let us be gone. I have no patience with this old mad woman. The people have not common sense." A little beyond Lyon, the general-in-chief of the army of the East appeared on the road, and Napoleon, alighting from his carriage, walked with him for a considerable way. When the general had taken his leave, one of the allied commissioners ventured to express his surprise that the emperor should have treated him with such an appearance of friendship and confidence. "What should I not?" inquired Napoleon. "Your Majesty is perhaps not aware of his conduct." "What has he done?" "Sire, he entered into an understanding with us several weeks ago." "It was even so," said the emperor. "He whom I had entrusted with the defense of France in this point sacrificed and betrayed the country. After many complaints of the perfidy of men in whom he had reposed confidence, he concluded by saying, the marshal was no longer the soldier. His early courage and virtues had raised him above the multitude, but honors, dignities, and fortune again reduced him to the common level. The conqueror Castiglione might have left behind him a name dear to his country, but France will execrate the memory of the traitor of Lyon and all who acted as he did, unless, indeed, their future services shall make amends for their past wrongs." This circumstance dictated the famous proclamation which the emperor issued on his return. "Frenchmen," said he, "the defection of the Duke of Castiglione left Lyon defenseless and at the mercy of the enemy. The army of which I had entrusted to that chief with the command was, from the number of its battalions and the courage and patriotism of its troops, capable of defeating the corps of the Austrian army opposed to it and advancing on the rear of the left flank of the enemy's force that threatened Paris. The victories of Champs-au-Père, Montmirail, Château-Thierry, Valchamp, Mormant, Montereau, Crayon, Reims, Arcy, Sur-Aube, and Saint-Dizier, the rising of the brave peasantry of Lorraine, Champagne, Alsace, and Franche-Comté, and Burgundy, the position which I had taken up in the rear of the enemy, intercepting his magazines, parks of reserve, convoys, and equipages, all had thrown the invading forces into a desperate situation. The French people never had the prospect of becoming more powerful. The enemy's picked corps would have been irretrievably lost and would have found their graves in those plains which they so mercilessly ravaged when the treason of the Duke of Ragusa delivered up the capital and disorganized the army. The unlooked-for conduct of these two generals, who at once betrayed their country, their prince, and their benefactor, changed the fate of the war. Such was the disastrous situation of the enemy after the affair which took place before Paris, that he was absolutely destitute of ammunition by being separated from his parks of reserve. Napoleon was less favorably received in proportion as he advanced to Provence, for there the machinations of his enemy had anticipated his arrival. He had escaped the ambush of Montmirail, but he could not avoid that of Orgon, and this part of his dictated narrative is not the least curious. On his arrival at the place of embarkation, he found two vessels in readiness to receive him, the one French and the other English. Napoleon went on board the English frigate, observing that he would never allow it to be said that a Frenchman had conveyed him away. Such is a brief account of the great event, the details of which, dictated by Napoleon himself, will, as I have already mentioned here, have to be presented to the public. France has been inundated with pamphlets on the subject, so full of falsehood and absurdity that every honest and sensible man now blushes for having given credit to them, or having had even the courage to read them. The following is the Treaty of Fontainebleau, to which I have already alluded. It was carefully suppressed at the time it was drawn up, was never published in the Moniteur and remained long unknown. It is to be found only in official collections, and even there the copies differ one from another. I presume, therefore, that its insertion here will not be deemed superfluous. It is intimately connected with the subject of which I have been treating, and many of its articles are still the topics of daily conversation, and it must, of course, be satisfactory to be enabled to discuss with a full knowledge of the facts. Treaty of Fontainebleau. Article 1. His Majesty the Emperor Napoleon renounces for himself his successors and descendants, as well as for all the members of his family, all rights of sovereignty and dominion over the French Empire and the Kingdom of Italy, as well as over every other country. 2. Their Majesties the Emperor Napoleon and Empress Maria Louisa shall retain the titles and rank to be enjoyed during their lives. The mother, brothers, sisters, nephews, and nieces of the emperor shall also retain, wherever they may reside, the titles of princes of the emperor's family. 3. The Isle of Elba, adopted by his majesty by the Emperor Napoleon as his place of residence, shall form during his life a separate principality, which shall be possessed by him in full sovereignty and property. There shall be besides granted in full property to the Emperor Napoleon an annual revenue of 2 million francs in rent charge in the Great Book of France, of which 1 million shall be in reversion to the Empress. The 4th, all the powers promise to employ their good offices in causing to be respected by the Barbary powers the flag and territory of the Isle of Elba, for which purpose the relations with the Barbary powers shall be assimilated to those of France. 5. The duchies of Parma, Placentia, and Guastella shall be granted in full property and sovereignty to Her Majesty the Empress Maria Louisa. They shall pass to the prince her son, and to his descendants in the right line. The prince shall henceforth take the title of Prince of Parma, Placentia, and Guastella. 6. There shall be reserved in the territories renounced by this treaty to the Majesty the Emperor Napoleon for himself and his family domains, rent charges, and the Great Book of France, producing an annual revenue clear of all deductions and charges of 2,500,000 francs. These domains or rents shall belong in full property to be disposed of, as I think fit, to the princes and princesses of the Emperor's family, and shall be divided among them in such manner that the revenues of each shall be in the following proportion. Madame Mayor, 300,000. King Joseph and his queen, 500,000. To King Louis, 200,000. To Queen Hortense and her children, 400,000. To Jerome and his queen, 500,000. To Princess Eliza, 300,000. To the Princess Paulina, 300,000. The princes and princesses of the family of the Emperor Napoleon shall moreover retain all the property, movable and immovable, of every kind whatever, which they may possess by private right, together with the rents which they hold also as private individuals in the Great Book of France, or the Monte Napoleone of Milan. 7. The annual pension of the Empress Josephine shall be reduced to 1 million in domains or inscriptions in the Great Book of France. She shall continue to enjoy in full property all her private fortune, movable and immovable, with power to dispose of it conformably to the French laws. 8. There shall be granted to Prince Eugene, Viceroy of Italy, a suitable establishment out of France. The 9th, the property which the Emperor Napoleon possesses in France, either as extraordinary domain or private domain, will remain attached to the crown of the funds vested by the Emperor in the Great Book of France, in the French Bank, and in the action de foray, or in any other manner, and which his majesty resigns to the crown. There shall be reserved a capital not exceeding 2 millions of francs to be expended in gratuities in favor of the individuals whose names shall be contained in a list signed by the Emperor Napoleon, and which shall be transmitted to the French government. 10. All the crown diamonds shall remain in France. The 11th, his majesty the Emperor Napoleon shall return to the treasury and to the other public funds all the sums and effects that may have been taken therefrom by his orders, with the exception of what has been appropriated from the civil list. 12. The debts of the household of his Majesty the Emperor Napoleon, such as they may be at the time of the signature of the present treaty, shall be immediately discharged out of the arrears due by the public treasury to the civil list, according to a list which shall be signed by a commissioner appointed for that purpose. 13. The obligations of the Monte Napoleone of Milan towards all creditors, whether Frenchmen or foreigners, shall be punctually fulfilled without any change being made in this respect. 14. There shall be granted all the necessary passports for the free passage of His Majesty the Emperor Napoleon, the Empress, the princes and princesses, and all of the persons of their suites who wish to accompany them or fix their abode in foreign countries, as well as for the passage of all the equipages, horses, and effects belonging to them. The Allied powers will, in consequence, furnish officers and men for escorts. 15. The French Imperial Guard shall furnish a detachment of from 1,200 to 1,500 men of all arms to serve as an escort to the Emperor to Saint-Tropez, to the place of his embarkation. 16. A brig and the necessary transport vessels shall be fitted out to convey to the place of his destination His Majesty the Emperor Napoleon and his household. The brig shall belong in full property to His Majesty the Emperor. 17. The Emperor shall be allowed to take with him and retain as his guard 400 men, volunteers and officers, as well as sub-officers and soldiers. 18. Every Frenchman who may follow the Emperor Napoleon or his family shall be held to have forfeited his rights as a Frenchman should he not return to France within 3 years, at least if he be not included in the exceptions which the French government reserves to itself to grant after the expiration of that period. 19. The Polish troops of all arms in the service of France shall be at liberty to return home and shall retain their arms and baggage as a testimony of their honorable services. The officers, sub-officers, and soldiers shall retain the decorations which have been granted to them and the pensions annexed to these decorations. 20. The Allied powers guarantee the execution of the articles of the present treaty and promise to obtain its adoption and guarantee by France. 21. The present act shall be ratified and the ratifications exchanged at Paris within 10 days or sooner possible. Done at Paris, April 11th, 1814. Signed Caulaincourt, MacDonald, Ney, and Metternich. The same articles are signed separately and under the same date by Count Nesselrode on behalf of Russia and Baron Hardenberg on behalf of Prussia. Declaration of accession in the name of Louis XVIII, the undersigned Minister and Secretary of State for the Department of Foreign Affairs, having submitted to the King the inquiry which their excellencies the plenipotentiaries of the Allied powers have been ordered by their sovereigns to make relative to the treaty of the 11th of April, to which the provisional government has acceded. His Majesty has been pleased to authorize him in his name to declare that the clauses of the treaty, in so far as France is concerned, shall be faithfully executed. The undersigned has consequently the honor to communicate this declaration to their excellencies. The Prince of Benevento, Paris, May 31st, 1814. The great European triumvirate drew up the Treaty of Fontainebleau. England acceded to it. A declaration made in the name of the King of France promised it fulfillment in so far as he was concerned. And yet, in spite of all these guarantees, it may be said that scarcely any of the articles were observed. Certainly, it would be difficult to conceive a more flagrant violation of good faith or a more absolute compromise of the august signatures which, it was to be expected, each party would have been individually interested in preserving, unsullied, and sacred. On these manifest violations was granted the moral justification of Napoleon's enterprise of 1815. This opinion was pretty generally adopted. It was advocated by the most distinguished members of the English Parliament, those indefatigable supporters of great principles, and by eminent statesmen of all countries. I may add to these high authorities an individual opinion which, though somewhat comically expressed, was not perhaps the less just. An Austrian gentleman of rank who was in Paris in 1815 and who was a furious enemy of Napoleon called on me just at the time when the emperor's advance to the capital began to produce a great sensation. The Austrian had already determined to set off, and he said with me, with all possible gravity and sincerity, "Certainly, he hitherto occupied the throne of France as a usurper. That's unquestionable. But," added he, quibbling with himself diplomatically, "if he should now conquer France, after all the monarchs of Europe have acknowledged him as a sovereign, and have entitled him to go to war by not observing the conditions they entered into, the case would be very different. And upon my word, for my own part at least, I think in that case there might be some ground for maintaining that he has become legitimate. At least I think I should myself be inclined to consider him so." Letter from Lord Castlereagh to Lord Bathurst, relative to the Treaty of Fontainebleau, Paris, 1815-1814. I shall, therefore, on the present occasion, confine myself to an explanation of what has passed with respect to the future destination and settlement of Napoleon and his family. Your lordship has been already informed by Lord Cathcart of the act of abdication which was passed by Bonaparte on the 4th instant, and of the assurance which was given him by the Emperor of Russia and the provisional government of a pecuniary provision of 6 millions of francs with a safe asylum in the island of Elba. The act in question was deposited in the hands of Monsieur de Caulaincourt and Marshals Ney and Macdonald to be given up upon the due execution of engagements on the part of the Allies with respect to the proposed arrangement. These persons were also authorized to agree to an armistice and to settle such a line of demarcation as might be satisfactory to the Allies and, in the meantime, prevented unnecessary effusion of blood. On my arrival, I found this arrangement on the point of execution. A convention had been discussed and would have in fact been signed in the course of the day by the Russian minister had not the approach of the Allied ministers been announced. The motives for accelerating the immediate conclusion of this act were the inconvenience, if not the danger, of Napoleon's remaining at Fontainebleau, surrounded by troops who still in a considerable degree remained faithful to him, the apprehension of intrigues in the army and in the capital, and the importance attached by a considerable portion of the officers to some arrangement favorable to their chief in satisfaction of their personal honor before they left him. On the night of my arrival, the 4 ministers had a conference with the Prince de Benevento on the subject of the proposed convention, to which I stated my objections, desiring at the same time to be understood as not urging them then at the hazard of the internal tranquility of France, nor in impeachment of what was due in good faith to the assurance given under the exigency of the moment by Russia. The Prince de Benevento admitted the weight of many of the objections stated, but declared that he did consider it on the part of the provisional government as an object of the first importance to avoid anything that might assume the character of a civil war, even for the shortest time, that he also found some such measure necessary to make the army pass over in a temper to be made use of. Upon these declarations, and the Count de Nesle wrote us that the Emperor, his master, had found it necessary, in the absence of the Allies, to act for the best in their name as well as his own. I withdrew any further opposition to the principle of the measures, suggesting only some alterations in the details. I desired, however, to decline on the part of my government, being more than an acceding party to the treaty, and declared that the active accession on the part of Great Britain should not go beyond the territorial arrangements proposed in the treaty. My objections to our unnecessarily mixing in its forms, especially in the recognition of Napoleon's title under the present circumstances, were considered as perfectly reasonable, and I now enclose the protocol and note which will explain the extent to which I have taken upon me to give assurances on the part of my court. At my suggestion, the recognition of the imperial titles in the family were limited to their respective lives, for which there was a precedent in the case of the King of Poland when he became Elector of Saxony. To the arrangement in favor of the Empress, I not only felt no objection, but considered it due to the distinguished sacrifice of domestic feelings which the Emperor of Austria was making to the cause of Europe. I should have wished to substitute another position in lieu of Elba for the seat of Napoleon's retirement, but none, having the quality of security on which he insisted, seemed disposable, to which equal objections did not occur, and I did not feel that I could encourage the alternative which Monsieur de Caulaincourt assured me Bonaparte repeatedly mentioned, namely an asylum in England. On the same night, the Allied ministers had a conference with Monsieur de Caulaincourt and the marshals, in which I assisted. The treaty was gone through and agreed to with alterations. It has been since signed and ratified, and Bonaparte will commence his movements towards the south tomorrow or the day following. Castlereagh. I thought it advisable to transcribe this letter. It throws a complete light on the treaty of the 11th of April, of the particulars of which I was ignorant even when at St. Helena, and it presents 2 points to which I particularly wish to call attention. It explains the observation which fell from the Emperor when I observed to him that on an important occasion he seemed to have forgotten the acknowledgement of his title by the English at Fontainebleau when he merely replied that it was done on purpose. Part 5. Now I learn from the letter above quoted that Lord Castlereagh studiously avoided the recognition, but this is no impeachment of the scrupulous correctness of Napoleon's assertions. The second point, which impartiality induces me to avert to, is that Lord Castlereagh in his letter speaks of the alternative offered by Napoleon to retire to England in default of the cession of the island of Elba. Add a few pages further on, November 16th, it will be found that Napoleon, on the contrary, reproaches Lord Castlereagh with having caused it to be insinuated to him that the adoption of England as a place of residence would be the preferable course. These two statements are certainly quite contradictory, but regard for impartiality, as I before observed, has induced me to insert them. The reader is therefore free to decide as he may think fit, for as I have often heard the Emperor say, one man's word is as good as another's. For my own part, my choice is soon determined. I adopt the words of Napoleon. In spite of the assertions of Lord Castlereagh, I still bear in mind the erroneous declarations of Lord Whitworth, which have been mentioned in the course of this journal, the scandalous assertions respecting Napoleon made by Lord Castlereagh in Parliament or in public assemblies, the garbled documents on the authority of which Murat's deposition was decreed, and the numerous denials so confidently expressed by Lord Bathurst in the House of Lords, the falsehood of which was manifest to every individual at St. Helena and occasioned embarrassment even to Sir Hudson Lowe. I shall therefore adhere to the opinion I have formed until I find a good reason to alter it.